Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today, we are opening a file that feels a little bit like reading a crime thriller. But instead of a crime scene in a dark alley or, a corporate boardroom, the scene of the crime is the pulpit. And the suspect is not some obvious villain twirling a mustache. It is often the guy everyone thinks is the hero.
It really is a strange dynamic. We spend so much time in the church worrying about the threats out there. We talk about secularism or the laws changing or, the loud heresies that make the news. But the data and the Bible tell us that the call is usually coming from inside the house.
We are doing a deep dive today into the silent threat, the threat that sits in the shepherd's chair. We are looking at the biblical qualifications for leadership, specifically one phrase that I think most of us, we just skip over it because it sounds so generic.
It is a phrase that sounds like a throwaway line, but it is actually a theological emergency if you get it wrong. It is the structural flaw that brings the whole building down.
The text is Titus 1.7, and the phrase is not self-willed.
Makaladu, not self-willed.
Now, before we get into the Greek, and I know we have some fascinating word studies to get to, I want to set the scene. Context is everything here. Paul is writing to Titus. Where is Titus?
Titus is on the island of Crete. And you have to understand, first century Crete was not a vacation destination. It was legendary for its moral chaos. It was the Wild West of the Mediterranean.
I remember reading that the ancients actually invented a verb, kritizo, which meant to lie like a Cretan.
They did. Paul actually quotes a Cretan poet in this very chapter who says, Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons. That was their reputation. It was a culture of deceit, violence, and a total lack of discipline.
So Paul leaves Titus there with a mission. He says, set in order what remains.
Right. The church is planted, but it is shaky. It needs walls, it needs structure. And the primary way you stabilize a church in a chaotic culture is by appointing leaders in every town.
So you are looking for men to stand against a culture of evil beasts and liars. If I am looking for a leader in that environment, my modern brain immediately goes to a specific archetype. I feel like I need a tough guy. I need a CEO. I need a visionary who can come in, crack the whip, and get everyone in line.
That is the modern instinct. We look for the strong man. We look for the singular visionary who can drive the organization forward through sheer force of personality. We want someone who can impose his will on the chaos.
But Paul throws a wrench in the gears. He gives this list of qualifications, and right near the top, he drops this negative requirement. He says, effectively, if you want to lead in God's house, you cannot be self-willed.
And that stops us in our tracks.
Yeah.
Because in our culture, and often in our business culture, being self-willed, being fiercely independent, being the guy who trusts his own gut above everyone else, we call that leadership.
We put that guy on the cover of magazines. We write biographies about him.
We do. But Paul says in the church, that trait is a disqualifier. And the stakes are incredibly high here. You pulled some stats for this deep dive that were pretty sobering regarding why pastors leave the ministry.
This blew my mind. The research suggests that something like 23% of pastors leave their church specifically due to conflict, and another 18% leave ministry entirely. They just quit the profession because of disputes.
That is a massive casualty rate. And if you were to do an autopsy on those conflicts, if you peeled back the layers, you rarely find that they were fighting over the doctrine of the Trinity or the hypostatic union.
That's not usually a theological heresy.
No. It is almost always a clash of wills. It is a leader who could not distinguish his will from God's will. It is a man who treated the church like his personal fiefdom.
That is the core thesis we need to get to today. This is not just about personality types. We are not saying, hey, try to be a nicer guy. This is about the nature of the office itself.
Right. Look at the text again, Titus 1.7. Paul says, for an overseer, as God's steward, must be blameless, not self-willed.
As God's steward.
That is the key image. The Greek word is oikonomos. It means a household manager.
So let's unpack that analogy. Because steward is one of those tricky words we use without thinking. We hear stewardship campaign and think about the budget. But it means something much more specific in the first century.
Think of it like a wealthy estate owner who goes away on a long trip. He leaves a manager in charge of his house. Now, does the manager own the house?
No.
Does he own the checkbook?
No.
Does he get to decide what the family eats or when they wake up based on his own preferences?
No, he follows the master's instructions.
Precisely. A steward manages someone else's property. Now imagine that manager decides, you know what, I hate the master's furniture. I am throwing it out. And I do not like the rules for the servants. I am going to make them work double shifts because I want to maximize profit for my own bonus.
He has gone rogue.
He has become a thief. He has usurped the master. He is acting as if he owns the place. That is what self-willed means in the context of the church. A self-willed pastor is a man who has forgotten he is a steward and has started acting like an owner.
He's the usurper.
He is, and the terrifying thing is you cannot be both. You cannot be a faithful steward of God's house and the king of your own castle at the same time.
I want to dig into the word itself. I love it when we get into the weeds of the language, especially when it changes how we see the verse. The word Paul uses is authadēs.
Authadēs. It is a compound word. It comes from autos, meaning self, and hodomai, meaning to please or to take pleasure.
So literally self-pleasing.
That is the etymology, yes. But words have a lexical range, a vibe, if you will, based on how they were used in the ancient world. And authadēs is much darker than just a guy who treats himself to a nice steak dinner.
What is the vibe?
It describes a man who is obstinately pleased with his own opinions. He is arrogant. He is surly. He is fiercely independent.
Fiercely independent. See, again, that sounds like a compliment in America. He is a maverick.
But in the covenant community, it is a cancer. The authadēs man views collaboration as compromise. If he has to sit in a meeting and negotiate, he feels like he is losing. If someone disagrees with him, he does not hear dissent, he hears rebellion.
I found a connection in the research notes to the Old Testament that really brought this home for me. Because sometimes Greek definitions can feel a bit abstract, but when you see the word in action, it clicks. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, uses this word authadēs in Genesis 49.
Yes, this is a crucial theological link. We are at the deathbed of Jacob. The patriarch is blessing and cursing his 12 sons, and he gets to Simeon and Levi.
Now, for the listener who skipped Sunday school that week, remind us who Simeon and Levi are. These are the guys involved in the incident at Shechem.
It is a brutal story. Their sister Dinah had been defiled by a prince of the city of Shechem. It was a terrible crime. But Simeon and Levi decided to take matters into their own hands. They tricked the men of Shechem into getting circumcised, claiming it was the only way they could intermarry.
So they made a religious covenant with them.
False pretenses. And while the men of the city were recovering in pain and vulnerable, Simeon and Levi went in with swords and slaughtered them all. Every male. It was a massacre.
It was vigilante justice.
It was. And years later, when Jacob looks back on that moment, he does not say, well, they were strong leaders defending the family honor. He curses their anger.
What does he say?
He says, cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. And in the Greek translation of that verse, the word used to describe the nature of their action, the spirit behind the massacre, is authadēs.
Whoa. So self-willed isn't just stubborn. It is burn it all down to get what I want.
That is the heart of it. Think about what they did. They did not care about the impact on the rest of the family. Jacob was terrified that the surrounding nations would wipe them out. They did not care about God's reputation. They did not care about justice, really. They cared about satisfying their own rage. It was self-pleasing violence.
That puts a whole new spin on Titus 1.7. When Paul says an elder must not be self-willed, he is saying, you cannot have a man in the pulpit who is willing to blow up the family of God just to satisfy his own ego or his own sense of rightness.
That is why Paul lists not self-willed right next to not quick-tempered in that list. They are cousins. In fact, the theologians we looked at call self-will a root-level disqualifier.
Meaning it is the root that other sins grow out of.
Precisely. Think about the mechanics of sin. If your heart is fundamentally set on pleasing yourself, if you're authadēs, what happens when someone crosses you?
You get angry. That is quick-tempered.
Right. What happens when persuasion fails and people will not do what you want?
Yeah.
You get harsh. That is striker or violent. What happens when you view the ministry as a vehicle for your own glory? You become greedy for gain.
It is the soil. If you have self-will in the soil, you are going to grow a whole garden of toxicity.
And that is why you cannot just trim the branches. You cannot tell an arrogant leader, hey, try to be less angry. If the root is self-will, the anger is just a symptom. The internal governance of the man is upside down. He is ruled from within by self, not from above by God.
This leads us to a really important theological distinction. Because we are reformed thinking and we love our categories, there's a distinction in the source material between magisterial power and ministerial power. And I think this is the key to understanding why a self-willed man is so dangerous to the soul of a church.
This is one of the pillars of Reformed ecclesiology, the doctrine of the church. If you get this wrong, you end up with tyranny.
So break it down. What is magisterial power?
Magisterial power is the authority to make laws. It is the authority to bind the conscience. It is the power to say, you must do this because I say so. It is legislative power.
And in the church, who holds that power?
Jesus Christ. And only Jesus Christ. He is the king and head of the church. He writes the laws.
Okay, so if Jesus has the magisterial power, what do the elders have? What does the pastor have?
They have ministerial power. It is declarative. Think of them as the king's heralds, or even more simply, as mail carriers.
Mail carriers.
The mail carrier does not write your mail. He does not open your mail and edit it. He does not decide to slip in a bill that he wrote himself. His job is strictly to deliver what has been sent.
Thus says the Lord.
Correct. Elders declare what Christ has already spoken in his word. They do not legislate, they apply.
That is a freeing distinction. But the self-willed man, the authadēs, he is not content with being a mailman, is he?
No. The mailman role is too humble for the self-willed man. He drifts into magisterial rule. He starts creating rules that Christ has not commanded.
Give me an example of what that looks like practically.
It can be subtle. It might be cultural preferences. Real Christians educate their kids this way. Or extra-biblical standards of holiness. You cannot drink alcohol, or you must dress this specific way. Or, most commonly, it is a demand for loyalty to his specific vision for the church.
If you are not on board with my 5-year building campaign, you are resisting the Spirit.
That is magisterial usurpation. He is binding consciences where Christ has left them free. And that is a direct violation of the Westminster Confession, specifically chapter 20, section 2. God alone is Lord of the conscience.
When a leader demands obedience to human commands as if they were divine, he is betraying true liberty. He is stepping into Jesus' shoes.
He is. And the Bible has a name for this guy. We see him in 3 John. His name is Diotrephes.
The classic villain of the New Testament church.
John writes this scathing little letter, and he says, I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first among them, does not acknowledge our authority.
Loves to be first. That is the definition of authadēs.
It is. And look at what Diotrephes was doing. He was not just annoying. He was kicking people out of the church who disagreed with him. He was refusing to welcome the apostles. He had created a little kingdom where he was the son, and everyone else had to orbit around him.
The notes called him a theological rival to Jesus Christ. That feels like a heavy charge. But if Christ is the head and you're acting like the head...
Then you are a rival.
Yeah.
You are a usurper. You are sitting on a throne that is not yours.
There is another terrifying parallel in the Old Testament, Ezekiel 34. This is the chapter that should make every pastor tremble.
You really should. God is bringing a lawsuit against the shepherds of Israel. And the specific charge is, woe to the shepherds of Israel who have been feeding themselves.
They were eating the sheep.
It is a grotesque image, but it is theologically accurate for the self-willed leader. The Hebrew concept there parallels authadēs. They viewed the flock as a resource. The sheep existed to provide wool, which is comfort and money, and meat, which is sustenance and ego for the shepherd.
So instead of the shepherd sacrificing for the sheep are sacrificed for the shepherd.
And God says the result is that the flock is scattered. They become prey. Leadership sins are community wounds. When a leader is self-willed, the people suffer. They are confused, they are hurt, and often they are driven away from God because the man representing God is so unlike him.
That brings us perfectly to the solution, or rather, the standard, because if the self-willed man is the problem, who is the model? We have to look at Christ.
Christ is the antitype. He is the perfect contradiction to the self-willed man. Romans 15.3 sums it up in one sentence that should be on the wall of every pastor's study. For even Christ did not please himself.
Think about the theology of that. If anyone in the universe had the right to be self-willed, to do exactly what he wanted, it was the Son of God.
He possessed all authority. He was in the form of God. And yet, look at the incarnation. Philippians 2 says he emptied himself. He took the form of a servant. The self-willed man wants to ascend. He wants to hoard power. He wants to be the man. Christ descended. He emptied himself of power to serve.
John 6.38 is another one that stops you cold. Jesus says, I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me.
That statement is staggering. The second person of the Trinity in his incarnate state defines his mission as submission. A self-willed leader defines his mission as assertion. I need to assert my vision. Christ says, I need to submit to the Father.
And this is not just a theological abstraction. This goes to the moment of greatest pressure. This goes to Gethsemane.
Gethsemane is the ultimate showdown of wills. You see the humanity of Jesus there, fully on display. He's recoiling from the cup of wrath. He knows what is coming, the physical torture, the spiritual separation from the Father. And he prays, "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me."
That is a real human desire to avoid suffering.
It is. But then comes the sentence that saves the world.
Nevertheless.
Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. That is the death blow to authadēs. That is a will trained to surrender even when it hurts, even when it costs him his life.
And this is the point, isn't it? If a shepherd cannot say, "Not my will," he is out of step with the very center of Christian discipleship.
Precisely. You cannot claim to follow the crucified king while ruling like a pagan king. Mark 10:45. The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom. Self-willed turns shepherding into self-display. Christ turns it into self-giving.
So for the guy listening who is an elder or wants to be an elder and is realizing, ooh, I might have a problem here, the answer isn't just try harder to be humble.
No, moralism will not work. You cannot just muscle your way into humility. The gravitational pull of the self is too strong. The answer is union with Christ. Galatians 2:202. I've been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me.
You have to preach the gospel to your own vanity.
Daily. The Spirit has to apply Christ's death to your old man. You have to reckon yourself dead to your need to be right, your need to win, your need to control.
Let's get practical. I love the diagnostic section of our sources because self-will is tricky. It hides. It wears a suit and tie. It learns the theological jargon. How do we spot it before it destroys a church?
It rarely announces itself. No one walks into a session meeting and says, "I am an arrogant usurper." It usually disguises itself as decisiveness or bold leadership, but there are stress tests that reveal it.
The first one is the reaction to no test. I think this is brilliant.
It is simple. Watch what happens when the man is overruled, especially in a plurality of elders. We are Presbyterians. We believe in rule by a group of elders, not a single pastor. So let's say the pastor wants to launch a new program, let's say a new satellite campus, and the other elders look at the budget and the manpower and say, "We do not think that is wise right now. We are voting no."
What does the self-willed man do?
He implodes or he explodes. He sulks. He manipulates. He uses passive-aggressive withdrawal. Maybe he stops talking in the meeting, crosses his arms and checks out, or he plays the ultimate card, resignation. "Well, you do not trust my vision. Maybe I should not be here."
Emotional blackmail.
Correct. He views the plurality not as safety. In the multitude of counselors, there is safety, but as an obstacle to his dominion. A godly man might be disappointed. He might passionately argue his case. But when the vote is cast, he submits because he trusts God works through the body. The self-willed man cannot yield without an internal revolt.
The second diagnostic is correction resistance.
This is huge. How does he handle criticism? The self-willed man reframes every question as an attack. If you say, "Pastor, I'm not sure about that illustration you used. It seemed a bit uncharitable," he hears, "I hate you and I want you fired."
And he spiritualizes his stubbornness. "I answer only to God."
Which sounds pious, but it is actually dangerous. It is a way of dodging accountability. The source material calls this the confession versus justification test. When he errs, and all leaders err, does he confess or does he justify?
Does he say, "I was wrong, full stop"? Or does he say, "I'm sorry you felt hurt by what I said, but you have to understand the pressure I am under"?
The non-apology apology. The self-willed man spins the narrative to maintain his image. He is allergic to the phrase, "I was wrong," because his authority is built on the illusion of his perfection. If he admits a mistake, he feels like the whole house of cards will fall.
Another one that I found really interesting is process contempt. This is for the administrative nerds, but it matters.
It really matters. The self-willed man hates the slow work of persuasion. He dislikes meetings. He dislikes policy. He views them as hurdles to getting things done.
So he creates workarounds.
Yes, the meeting before the meeting. He calls 3 elders individually to get them on his side so that the actual meeting is just a rubber stamp. Or he creates informal decisions that become irreversible facts on the ground.
Whoa, I already signed the contract for the new sound system. Sorry, guys. I thought we were all on the same page.
That is the move. He treats the shared governance of the church as a nuisance. He wants to move fast, and biblical wisdom is often slow.
Then there is coercive persuasion.
This is about how he wins arguments. Does he win by opening the Bible and patiently teaching? Or does he win by using urgency, shame, or fear?
If you really cared about the lost, you would support this building project.
That is it. Framing disagreement as spiritual deficiency. You have a spirit of fear, you are resisting the Spirit, you are legalistic. The result is a culture of silence. People learn that peace means agreement. If you disagree, you are labeled a troublemaker.
One more diagnostic. Preference absolutism.
This is where he confuses his personal taste with biblical principle. He expands the must category. It's not just we must preach the gospel. It becomes we must preach the gospel using this specific microphone, with this specific lighting, at this specific time, using this specific translation.
And if you suggest a different microphone, you are compromising the gospel.
Precisely. He burdens consciences where God has left liberty. He makes his preferences into laws.
These diagnostics are painful because I think we have all seen them. Or maybe, if we are honest, we have been guilty of them in our own spheres of influence. But God gives us guardrails. We are not left defenseless against this kind of leader.
No, Christ loves his church too much to leave us without defenses. That is what ecclesiology is. It is not just boring committee structures. It is a defense system against sin. It is a blast wall.
So what are the guardrails?
The first and most obvious is the plurality of elders.
Shared oversight.
Authority is joint. It is not monarchical. In a healthy church, no one man holds all the cards. This forces a man to persuade others. He cannot just command, he has to convince. And that slows things down, which is good. It normalizes accountability. Brother, I think you are wrong. Should be a normal, safe sentence in an elders meeting.
Another guardrail is transparent process.
Self-will feeds on ambiguity. It loves unwritten rules. Healthy ecclesiology demands that decisions be made in the light. We have documented procedures. We have minutes. We have clear budgets.
It sounds bureaucratic, but it protects the sheep.
It does. If the rules are clear, the strong personality cannot just make them up as he goes along. Transparency is the enemy of tyranny.
What about confessional standards? We mentioned the Westminster Confession earlier. How does a confession help against a self-willed leader?
It binds the leader. It is a contract. It prevents the Bible alone from becoming my interpretation alone.
Yeah.
If a pastor comes in with a crazy new idea, say he decides the church needs to start observing Old Testament dietary laws, the elders can say, wait a minute, we subscribe to the confession and that is not in there. It protects the church from doctrinal novelty driven by a charismatic personality.
And then there's discipline.
Rightly used discipline. If a leader is bullying people, there needs to be a mechanism to stop him. Not just gossip, but formal charges, witnesses, a trial.
And the right of appeal.
This is the beauty of a connectional church like Presbyterianism. If your local session is dominated by a tyrant, you can appeal to the presbytery. You can go to the broader church. It reminds the local leaders, you are not the Supreme Court. You are under review.
That brings us to the so what section. Application. Let's talk about hiring. If a church is looking for a pastor, how do they avoid hiring a self-willed man? Because these guys can be very charming in an interview.
This is where most search committees fail. They look for the gifted communicator. They look for the guy who looks good in a suit and can cast a vision.
The CEO type.
Right. But you need to test for character. And you cannot do that with hypothetical questions. If you ask, what would you do if the elders disagreed with you? He's going to give you the textbook answer. Oh, I would listen and pray.
It is a performance.
Exactly. You need the history test. Ask about the past.
Give me some questions.
Tell us about a time you were corrected by a layperson. Tell us about a time you lost a vote in your previous church. Tell us about a conflict you had and how you resolved it.
And if he says, well, I've never really been corrected because I am usually right, or I have never lost a vote.
Run away. Run fast. You are looking for patterns of submission, not just performance.
Yeah.
And call his references. Do not just ask, is he a good preacher? Ask, how does he handle being told no? Does he have a temper?
What about for current elders? If you are in the seat right now.
You need to cultivate habits that kill self-will. One powerful habit is the practice of silence. Learn to listen more than you speak. In a meeting, make it a rule that you let everyone else speak before you give your opinion.
That is hard for a leader. We like to shape the conversation.
It is hard, but it breaks the need to dominate. And active repentance. Make confession a normal rhythm. Do not wait for a scandal. When you interrupt someone, stop and say, I am sorry I was rude. Please continue.
Small acts of death to self.
Precisely. Seek out the people who disagree with you and wash their feet. Serve them. Take them to coffee. Ask them about their lives. Prove to your own heart that they are not your enemies.
Now, a word for the congregation. Because sometimes, let's be honest, the congregation wants a self-willed leader.
We have the idol of pragmatism. We want results. We want the church to grow.
Yeah.
We want the parking lot paved. We want the youth group booming. And we think, well, this guy is a bit of a bully. He leaves a trail of bodies. But hey, the church is growing. He gets things done.
We trade character for results.
That is a deadly trade.
Yeah.
Do not demand a Saul, a head and shoulder strong man. Understand that strong leadership in the Bible is not dominion, it is service.
And a very practical warning from the sources. If a leader demands NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, or absolute loyalty oaths.
That is the authadēs spirit manifest. The church is a family, not a secret society. If transparency is treated as a threat, self-will is on the throne.
Before we close, I want to make an important distinction, because some people might hear this and think, okay, so an elder should never be firm, he should just be a pushover, we want a damp rag for a pastor.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Titus 1.92 verses later says he must hold fast the faithful word. He must be able to exhort and refute. Elders must be firm.
So what is the difference between holy firmness and self-will?
It comes down to the source and the tone. Holy firmness comes from submission to Scripture. I am standing here because God says so. Self-will comes from ego. I am standing here because I say so.
And the tone.
Holy firmness is gentle. It is patient. It wants to win the brother. It weeps while it corrects. Self-will is irritable. It is punitive. It wants to crush the opposition.
And the reaction to loss?
That is the tell. Holy firmness yields peaceably in matters of wisdom. If it is not a sin issue, the godly man can say, okay, we will do it your way. The self-willed man plots to regain control.
That is a helpful diagnostic. We need men with backbones of steel, but hearts of velvet.
That is a good way to put it. We need men who are fierce about God's truth, but flexible about their own preferences.
So to summarize, not self-willed. It is not just a personality quirk. It is not just don't be a jerk. It is a mercy to the sheep.
It is a safeguard for God's honor. The church needs crucified stewards, not crowned personalities.
I want to leave our listeners with this final thought from the research, which I found incredibly provocative. The world screams at us. Assert yourself. Build your brand. Be the main character.
And Christ whispers, deny yourself. Pick up your cross.
The safest churches are not the ones led by the most forceful, dynamic personalities.
No, they are led by men who have been conquered by grace. Men who are willing to lose their way when Christ's way is clear.
That is the kind of leader we need, and that is the kind of leader we should pray to become. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Titus 1.7.
It has been a pleasure.
See you next time on Reformed Thinking.